This incident occurred on Halloween night in 2008. I was a 14-year-old, eagerly anticipating that year's Halloween because it fell on a Friday, allowing us to stay out later than usual. My plan was to go trick-or-treating with my friend Matthew, followed by a sleepover at my house. I lived with my dad, who worked night shifts as a security guard, and he would be gone from sundown to sunrise, leaving Matthew and me to our own devices. Around 7 p.m., Matthew arrived, and we hastily donned some cheap costumes before embarking on our trick-or-treating adventure. Our neighborhood was less than ideal for trick-or-treating. Situated in a wooded area with widely spaced houses, we had to walk quite a distance between each door. However, the homeowners were generous and compensated for the inconvenience by giving out larger amounts of candy. Although we encountered other trick-or-treaters during our walks, there weren't as many as one might expect, as there weren't many kids in the area. After about 2 hours of trick-or-treating, I noticed someone following us. It was either a grown man or a very tall kid, and he was wearing a Michael Myers mask that concealed his face. Initially, I assumed he was just another trick-or-treater, but I soon realized he had no candy bag, and he was alone, not accompanied by a child. I shared my concerns with Matthew, but he urged us to keep going, reassuring me that if the person persisted, we could head back. However, the stranger continued to follow us, and I noticed that he didn't approach any houses to collect candy. Instead, he remained behind us. This time, Matthew seemed more apprehensive. We were nearing a shortcut through the woods that led directly to my house, so we sprinted through it, uncertain if we were still being pursued. Once at home, we hurriedly locked all the doors and windows. I remember being upstairs, securing my bedroom window when I heard Matthew shouting from downstairs. As I rushed downstairs, I found him next to the living room window. When I asked what was wrong, he didn't speak. Instead, he pointed outside the window. Struggling to see in the darkness, I looked in the direction he indicated and saw the figure in the Michael Myers mask standing deep in the forest, partially obscured by a tree. He remained completely motionless. I went to the kitchen to grab the phone and called my dad. As I described the situation, I glanced back out the window and told my dad that the stranger was still standing there, watching the house. My dad's response was less reassuring than I had hoped for. He suggested it might be a teenager attempting to scare us and advised us to lock all the doors and ignore him. Matthew and I returned to my room, but we couldn't stop thinking about the ominous presence outside. We attempted to come up with logical explanations, but our thoughts were interrupted by the sound of shattering glass from downstairs. Our hearts raced as we realized the phone was downstairs, and we had no way to call for help. We turned off the lights and hid in the closet, pressing ourselves into the corner behind hanging clothes. For the next few minutes, there was complete silence, followed by the sound of footsteps entering the room. The intruder began to move around, and my heart pounded in my chest. Then, the closet door slowly creaked open. It felt like an eternity of silence before Matthew suddenly screamed. The intruder had yanked him out of the closet and now stood before us, wearing the Michael Myers mask and wielding a knife. Matthew was engaged in a struggle with the intruder, during which the knife was dropped. In a split second, I seized the opportunity and stabbed the intruder in the back of his thigh. He fell to the side, screaming in pain, and Matthew managed to get up. We fled downstairs, rushed outside, and sprinted to our neighbor's house. We banged on their door until they answered, explaining our harrowing ordeal. They let us inside and called the police. To make a long story short, the police couldn't locate the intruder. He had disappeared from the house by the time they arrived. The only evidence of the encounter was a broken window and a missing kitchen knife. Despite searching for a blood trail, they never found one. Fortunately, I sustained no injuries, but Matthew wasn't as fortunate. He had received a cut on his arm. Even today, I can't help but think about that terrifying night. When I was 19, I resided in my parents' house. This incident occurred on Halloween, and as was customary each year, my parents assigned me the task of distributing candy to the trick-or-treaters who came to our door. I didn't mind, since our living room was conveniently located right next to the front door. I decided to put on a movie and would get up to answer the door whenever the doorbell rang. It was around 10 p.m., and the doorbell chimes were gradually becoming less frequent. Both of my parents had retired for the night. I can recall this event quite vividly. I was engrossed in the final scene of The Dark Knight when suddenly the home phone rang. My gaze shifted to the left, where the caller ID displayed unknown caller. Just the other day, we had received a new set of phones and hadn't shared our new number with anyone yet. I doubted it was someone I knew, but I decided to answer it, just in case. I picked up the receiver and greeted, "Hello." However, all I could hear was heavy breathing, so I hung up. I assumed it might be someone attempting to prank call me, considering it was Halloween night. Nevertheless, it struck me as unusual, as this behavior is typically associated with children, or at most, teenagers. From the sound of it, the person on the other end sounded much older. Over the next 10 minutes, the phone rang 6 or 7 more times with the same unknown caller label. Finally, when it rang again, I picked it up without uttering a word. After a brief silence, a male voice spoke up. I can't recall the exact words, but it was something along the lines of how he was outside our house and needed me to unlock the back door so he could enter. He warned that if we contacted the police, he would harm everyone inside before they could arrive. Then, the call abruptly disconnected. By this point, I was thoroughly convinced that this wasn't a mere prank call. I stealthily made my way to the kitchen, moving on all fours to avoid being seen through the windows. I grasped the largest knife I could find and proceeded to my parents' room. I shook my dad awake and whispered to him that someone was lurking near the back door. He immediately jumped out of bed, armed himself with his loaded revolver, and we began to navigate the house quietly. As I explained the situation to my father, we arrived at the back door. He unlocked it and stepped outside without hesitation, firing a warning shot into the air. At that very moment, 3 men emerged from a thicket of bushes right against the house and hastily retreated. They sprinted into the nearby forest, and despite my dad's pursuit, they outpaced him and vanished into the trees. We never saw them again, and their identities remained a mystery. We promptly reported the incident to the police, but unfortunately, they were unable to take any meaningful action. To this day, we remain baffled as to how they obtained our phone number and what their true intentions were. Last Halloween, a year ago, I was 18, and my best friend, Michael, was 17. We were aware that we were probably too old for trick-or-treating, but the prospect of Halloween without any fun or candy didn't sit well with us. That's when Michael had an idea. Near my place, there was an old abandoned house we had always talked about exploring someday. Halloween night seemed like the perfect occasion. We waited until it got dark and even longer, until there were fewer trick-or-treaters outside. With a couple of flashlights in hand, we finally ventured to the old house. The moment of truth had come. As expected, the abandoned house was a chaotic mess, with trash strewn across the floor and boarded-up windows. We cautiously entered through the front door, half expecting it to be locked, but it creaked open. Inside, darkness enveloped us, and our flashlights barely pierced it. Undeterred, we pressed on. The house had 2 floors, so we meticulously explored the entire ground floor, finding nothing of interest. We then ascended the stairs, where we encountered 2 rooms. Michael chose the one on the right, while I entered the one on the left. I searched through drawers and closets, but still nothing piqued my interest. I was gazing out of a window when piercing screams echoed from the other room. It was Michael. Without hesitation, I rushed to his aid. Initially, I couldn't discern anything unusual, but as I pointed my flashlight toward the back left corner, I saw Michael struggling with someone dressed entirely in black, wearing a Halloween mask. The masked intruder had Michael in a chokehold, and I could see his face turning red. In a desperate move, I hurled my flashlight at the assailant with all my might. It struck him in the side, causing him to release Michael and howl in pain. In the ensuing darkness, we fled downstairs and stumbled out of the house into the obscurity of the night. As we made our escape, a chilling sight met our eyes. Lit only by the moonlight, we saw 3 figures in the upstairs window, all donning the same eerie Halloween mask. We quickly turned and ran, fear propelling us forward. We didn't stop until we reached my driveway, gasping for breath. Neither of us could fathom what we had encountered that night. Later, Michael recounted his ordeal. When he entered the room, he initially explored it like any other, but after a while, he noticed something in the corner. When he aimed his flashlight at it, he realized it was a Halloween mask. He approached, thinking it was leaning against the wall, but then it moved. That's when he grasped that it was a person. He screamed out, only to be swiftly ensnared in a chokehold. What disturbs me most is Michael's description of being held. He claimed that the person in the mask had exerted immense force on his neck. It wasn't mere restraint. He genuinely couldn't breathe for nearly 20 seconds. As for what those individuals were doing or why, we remain clueless. One thing we both agree on is that we stumbled upon something we were never meant to witness. I am convinced that we narrowly escaped a life-threatening situation that fateful night.